Emma and Liam Wilson, aged 17 and 16, were sentenced to death for the premeditated murder of their parents, Michael and Isabella Wilson, by poisoning their dinner with a lethal mixture of prescription drugs in their Honolulu, Hawaii home. The siblings had meticulously ground pills from their father's medical cabinet into a fine powder, mixing it into the marinara sauce that would be served only on their parents' portions that fateful evening of March 12. As Michael and Isabella began to eat, they initially complained about an unusual taste before experiencing the first symptoms. Dizziness followed by slurred speech, then violent seizures as their nervous systems began to shut down. The teenagers watched, according to prosecutors, with clinical detachment as their parents suffered through agonizing deaths on the dining room floor, making no attempt to call emergency services until nearly an hour after both parents had stopped moving. The Wilson residence sat in the exclusive Kahala neighborhood, a sprawling 5-bedroom home with an infinity pool overlooking the Pacific, purchased with the substantial income from Michael Wilson's successful neurosurgery practice. The night of the murders had been planned to coincide with the family's usual Sunday dinner, a tradition Isabella had insisted upon to maintain family cohesion despite increasingly strained relationships within the household. Emma had volunteered to cook that evening, an unusual offer that should have been the first warning sign, as she had shown little interest in culinary pursuits before that night. Liam had set the table, carefully ensuring that their parents' plates were placed at specific positions, later revealed to be part of their calculated plan to avoid any accidental switching of the poisoned portions. Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual that night, a fact that investigators found particularly disturbing given the violent nature of the deaths that occurred inside. The tropical Hawaiian night had continued peacefully outside, stars visible in the clear sky, gentle trade winds rustling through the plumeria trees that dotted the Wilsons' immaculately landscaped yard. Only the arrival of police vehicles, their silent lights painting the white stucco walls with rhythmic flashes of blue and red, alerted the community that something had gone terribly wrong in Paradise. By morning, news had spread throughout the island that 2 respected community members were dead. And by afternoon, the incomprehensible truth began to emerge. Their own children were the prime suspects. The 911 call played later in court revealed Emma's voice, carefully modulated to sound panicked as she reported finding her parents unresponsive after returning home from a movie. "Please help. I think something's wrong with my parents," she said, her voice breaking at precisely the right moments. Dispatchers instructed her to check for pulses and attempt CPR, which recordings revealed she claimed to be doing, while investigators later determined from lividity patterns that both victims had been dead for at least an hour before the call was placed. Forensic analysis of the siblings' cell phones would later show text messages between them during the supposed movie time, with one chilling exchange reading simply, "Is it done?" followed by, "Yes, no going back now." First responders described a scene that would haunt even the most experienced among them. 2 bodies contorted in positions indicating severe pain before death, faces frozen in expressions of betrayal and disbelief. Michael Wilson's body was found several feet from the dining table, suggesting he had managed to stand and attempt to move toward the home phone mounted on the kitchen wall before collapsing. Isabella remained slumped in her dining chair, her head resting on the table in a grotesque parody of someone who had simply fallen asleep during dinner. The positions told a story of desperate final moments of confusion giving way to the terrible realization of what was happening and finally the knowledge that their own children had done this to them. Toxicology reports would reveal a deadly cocktail of medications in the victims' systems. Propranolol from Michael's heart medication combined with high doses of his patient's leftover opioid painkillers and sleeping pills prescribed to Isabella for her occasional insomnia. The combination had been researched. Evidence would show on Liam's laptop in carefully deleted but forensically recovered searches made in the weeks prior to the murders. The lethal mixture had been designed to cause maximum suffering while ensuring death, a particularly cruel choice that prosecutors would later emphasize showed the calculated nature of the crime. The siblings had even used their knowledge from advanced high school chemistry classes to enhance the solubility of the drugs, ensuring they would dissolve completely in the acidic tomato sauce without leaving visible traces. When detectives arrived, they found Emma and Liam sitting side by side on the front steps of the home. their shoulders touching in what initially appeared to be mutual comfort and grief. Detective Satoshi Palmer, a 20-year veteran of the Honolulu Police Department's Homicide Division, would later testify that something about their body language immediately struck him as wrong. They weren't just close, he told the court. They were practically intertwined, more like lovers than siblings in shock. Both teenagers were still in their dinner clothes. Emma in a sundress, Liam in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, creating a picture of wholesome family life that stood in stark contrast to the horror inside the house behind them. Neither sibling showed physical signs of having attempted CPR, as Emma had claimed on the 911 call. No sweat despite Hawaii's humid evening air. No dishevelment of clothing. And most tellingly, no trace of the vomited material that covered parts of the bar crime scene. Their story, practiced to perfection, was that they had gone to see a movie at the Kahala Malal Cinema, returning to find their parents already unresponsive. Security footage from the mall would later reveal they had indeed purchased tickets, but never entered the theater. Instead, spending those critical hours sitting in Liam's car in the farthest corner of the parking lot, presumably waiting for enough time to pass before discovering their parents' bodies. The siblings maintained their composure through initial questioning, their stories matching with a precision that would later be seen as evidence of extensive planning. Rather than truth, they expressed appropriate shock and grief in all the right places, even producing tears on cue when speaking of their future without parents. Only one detective, a junior officer named Kai Nakamura, noted in his report that neither teenager asked the typical questions family members usually posed in such situations. No, how did this happen? Or could they have been saved if we'd been home? Instead, they seemed primarily concerned with what would happen to them now, who would take custody, and whether they would be allowed to remain in the family home. Michael Wilson had arrived in Hawaii 15 years earlier, accepting a prestigious position at Queen's Medical Center after completing his neurosurgery residency at Johns Hopkins. His colleagues described him as brilliant but humble, a surgeon whose steady hands had saved countless lives and whose research into traumatic brain injuries had earned him international recognition in medical circles. He was known for taking on the most challenging cases, often operating on patients others had deemed too risky, giving hope to families who had been told elsewhere to prepare for the worst. Michael had also established a foundation that provided specialized neurological care to underserved communities across the Hawaiian Islands, flying to remote locations on his rare days off to conduct clinics and follow up with patients who couldn't travel to Honolulu. His commitment to his patients was unwavering. The night before his murder, he had been on the phone until midnight, consulting on a difficult case, demonstrating the dedication that had earned him the respect of everyone in the medical community. Isabella Wilson had been equally beloved in her role as a guidance counselor at Puno School, one of Hawaii's most prestigious private institutions, where both her children were students on academic scholarships. She had a master's degree in psychology and was known for her exceptional ability to connect with troubled teens, often becoming the one trusted adult in the lives of students struggling with family problems or personal crisis. Colleagues testified that she had a special gift for identifying children in need of intervention before their issues escalated, making her particularly effective at preventing teen suicides and addressing substance abuse problems before they became severe. Isabella volunteered weekends at a crisis text line for teens and was writing a book on adolescent mental health that was found half-finished on her laptop after her death. The cruel irony that she had failed to recognize the dangerous pathology developing under her own roof became a central theme in media coverage of the case. The Wilsons had met during their undergraduate years at Stanford University, where Michael was pre-med and Isabella studied psychology, beginning a romance that friends described as profound and nurturing. Wedding photos shown during the trial revealed a young couple radiant with hope and ambition standing under a flower arch with a Hawaiian sunset painting the sky behind them in shades of orange and pink. They had decided to start their family quickly, with Emma born just 11 months after their wedding and Liam following 16 months later. Family vacation photos entered into evidence showed yearly trips to national parks, beach outings, and holiday celebrations. A visual timeline of what appeared to be a perfect family living an enviable life in paradise. The apparent happiness in these images made what happened all the more incomprehensible to those who knew them. Michael and Isabella had created a home that neighbors and friends described as warm and welcoming, often hosting community gatherings and fundraisers for various causes. Their modern Kahala home with its open floor plan and large windows maximizing the stunning ocean views was featured in a local architectural magazine the year before their deaths. The article, ironically titled Healing Spaces, described how the couple had designed their home to be a sanctuary from the stresses of their demanding careers with a meditation garden, a music room where Isabella played piano, and a spacious kitchen where the family often cooked together. The dining room where they were murdered had been specifically designed with a large round table to promote conversation and connection, a physical manifestation of Isabella's belief in the importance of family meals for maintaining healthy relationships. What no one outside the family knew was that in the months leading up to their murders, Michael and Isabella had been privately struggling with a horrifying discovery about their children. According to journals found in Isabella's desk, secured with a simple lock that investigators easily opened, she had first noticed concerning behaviors between her children 6 months before her death. Her professional training had alerted her to warning signs: the way they sought exclusive time together, their unusual physical closeness, and their joint withdrawal from previously enjoyed social activities and friendships. Her last journal entry, dated just 3 days before her murder, revealed her agony. "How did I miss this? What did we do wrong as parents that our children would turn to each other in this unnatural way? Michael wants to confront them tomorrow, but I'm afraid of what might happen. They've become so secretive, so bonded against us. I've already reached out to Dr. Levinson about intensive family therapy and possibly separating them into different therapeutic environments." The Wilson children had once been the pride of their parents, both testing into gifted programs in elementary school and maintaining exceptional academic records. Emma was a talented violinist who performed with the Honolulu Youth Symphony, while Liam excelled in science competitions, winning the state chemistry Olympiad 2 years in a row. Teachers described them as polite, engaged students who seemed to have bright futures ahead of them. Yet, forensic psychologists would later identify subtle warning signs that had been missed. Both siblings showed little genuine empathy for others, excelled at manipulating adults with charm and apparent compliance, and demonstrated an unusual codependence that had been misinterpreted as healthy sibling closeness. Isabella's sister, Catherine Brooks, testified through tears about her last conversation with Isabella just 1 day before the murders. "She called me in California completely distraught, saying she'd found inappropriate photos and messages on Emma's phone." Catherine told the hushed courtroom. She and Michael had been worried about the kids' relationship for months, but this was concrete proof of what they feared. Catherine had urged her sister to seek immediate professional intervention, offering to fly to Hawaii to help support the family through what would undoubtedly be a difficult process. "She told me they were planning to confront the kids the next evening after dinner with the therapist already scheduled for emergency sessions starting the following day. That family meeting never happened, as the siblings' lethal plan was executed during the meal intended to precede it." In the days following the discovery of the bodies, friends and colleagues struggled to reconcile their memories of the Wilson family with the emerging horror of what had happened. Michael's surgical partner of 12 years, Dr. Raymond Keller, spoke at their memorial service about the profound loss to the medical community and to Michael's patients, many of whom attended despite Hawaii's lingering COVID restrictions. "He wasn't just saving lives," Dr. Keller said, his voice breaking. "He was improving them, fighting for quality of life when others would have settled for merely preserving existence." Isabella's principal spoke of the hundreds of students whose paths through adolescence had been gentled by her guidance, reading letters from former students who credited her with saving them from depression, addiction, and suicidal thoughts. The brutal severing of these meaningful lives created ripples of grief throughout Honolulu's tight-knit communities. Michael had been scheduled to perform a high-risk surgery the day after his murder, a procedure to remove a tumor from the brainstem of a 7-year-old girl from Maui. Another surgeon eventually performed the operation, but with less experience in such delicate procedures, leaving the child with partial facial paralysis that might have been avoided under Michael's skilled hands. Isabella had been organizing a teen mental health awareness week at her school, and the event proceeded in her honor, now with the added tragic dimension of addressing how to recognize dangerous behavioral patterns in young people that might indicate potential for violence. As investigators pieced together the final weeks of Michael and Isabella's lives, they discovered increasing evidence of the parents' growing alarm about their children's relationship. Browser history on Isabella's computer showed searches for sibling inappropriate attachment, genetic sexual attraction, and therapeutic boarding schools for troubled teens. Michael had consulted privately with a psychiatric colleague. Emails revealed, sending a heavily anonymized description of behaviors he had observed and receiving advice to seek immediate intervention. The couple had also met with their family lawyer 2 weeks before their deaths, making changes to their will that would have placed the children under the guardianship of Isabella's sister in California. A move that investigators believe may have been intended to physically separate the siblings. The 911 call came in at 9:47 p.m. on that Sunday evening, with Emma Wilson's carefully modulated voice reporting the emergency to dispatcher Leilani Canahelli. "I need help, please," she said, her voice breaking just enough to sound genuine. "We just got home and found our parents on the dining room floor." The dispatcher instructed Emma to check for pulses and breathing, which she claimed to do while on the call. "I can't feel anything," she reported, her voice trembling. "They're not moving at all." When asked if there were any obvious injuries, Emma described vomit around her mother's mouth and mentioned that her father appeared to have collapsed while trying to reach the phone mounted on the kitchen wall. This detail, the specific position of Michael Wilson's body reaching toward the phone, would later become crucial evidence, as it was intentionally withheld from all public reports about the case. First responders arrived at the Wilson residence at 9:53 p.m., entering the security code Emma provided to access the gated community of luxury homes perched on the hillside with panoramic views of Honolulu's coastline. Paramedic Jonah Maho was first on scene, immediately confirming what he suspected from the moment he saw the victims. Both Michael and Isabella Wilson were well beyond resuscitation efforts, their bodies already showing signs of rigor mortis. "The scene wasn't consistent with the timeline the teenagers gave us," Maho later testified. "Based on the body temperature and a state of rigor, these people had been dead for at least an hour, probably closer to 2. The position of the bodies told a story of desperate final moments. Michael had made it several steps toward the wall-mounted phone before collapsing, his arm still outstretched in a final effort to seek help, while Isabella remained at the table, slumped forward onto her plate, in a position suggesting she had lost consciousness more quickly than her husband. Detective Satoshi Palmer arrived 20 minutes later, by which time the property had been secured as a potential crime scene based on the suspicious circumstances noted by the first responders. The lush tropical landscaping that surrounded the Wilson home, normally providing privacy from neighbors, now cast eerie shadows in the flashing lights of emergency vehicles as Palmer made his way up the curved driveway. The detective's first impression upon entering the home, with its soaring ceilings, ocean view windows, and expensive artwork, created a stark juxtaposition with the horror centered in the dining room. "It wasn't just the bodies that struck me," Palmer would later testify. "It was the absolute normality of everything else. Plates of half-eaten pasta, wine glasses still containing Cabernet, classical music still playing softly from hidden speakers, and a perfectly set table with an artfully arranged centerpiece of local flowers." The initial examination of the scene revealed several crucial pieces of information that immediately triggered Palmer's suspicions about the circumstances of the deaths. Both victims showed signs consistent with poisoning: dried vomit on and around their mouths, blue-tinged lips indicating oxygen deprivation, and facial expressions frozen in what appeared to be pain and confusion. The dining table held 4 place settings, but only 2 showed signs of use, with the plates at Emma's and Liam's settings appearing untouched, despite the teenagers' claim that they had begun eating before leaving for their movie. Most tellingly, the pot of marinara sauce, still simmering on low heat in the kitchen, contained significantly more sauce than what had been served, suggesting that someone had intentionally separated portions. A detail that would later align perfectly with the forensic evidence when tests revealed the sauce in the pot was free of toxins, while the sauce on the victims' plates contained lethal concentrations. Crime scene technicians worked methodically through the night, photographing the scene from every angle before anything was disturbed, paying particular attention to the position of Michael Wilson's outstretched hand pointing toward the kitchen phone. A detail that Detective Palmer specifically instructed should be kept confidential as potential evidence only the killer would know. The home's security system provided valuable evidence, revealing that contrary to the siblings' story of going out to a movie, the only entries or exits recorded that day were Michael and Isabella returning from church at 11:30 a.m., a grocery delivery at 2:15 p.m. received by Emma, and finally emergency responders entering at 9:53 p.m. The system showed no record of Emma and Liam leaving for their purported movie, raising immediate questions about their timeline. When confronted with this discrepancy, the siblings quickly adjusted their story, claiming they must have used the side gate that connected to a public beach access path, a gate that records showed had not been opened in over 3 weeks. As dawn broke over Honolulu, casting golden light across the crime scene that contrasted cruelly with its contents, the bodies of Michael and Isabella Wilson were finally removed from their home in black zippered bags. The Hawaii Medical Examiner's Office took custody of the remains, with Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Alana Nakamura personally overseeing the case due to Michael Wilson's prominence in the medical community. Preliminary examination at the scene had already suggested poisoning as the cause of death, but full toxicology would be needed to identify the specific substances. Dr. Nakamura noted the unusual blue discoloration of the fingernails and lips, suggesting cyanosis from respiratory depression and the presence of what appeared to be partially digested medication in the vomitus. Whatever killed them was fast-acting but not instantaneous, she noted in her preliminary report. They had time to realize what was happening but not enough time to effectively seek help. While the bodies were being transported, other investigators continued processing the scene, collecting samples from every food item in the kitchen with particular focus on the pasta meal that appeared to have been the last thing consumed by the victims. Detective Palmer interviewed neighbors, none of whom reported hearing anything unusual that evening. No screams, no sounds of distress, no arguments. One neighbor, Mrs. Helen Tanaka, mentioned seeing Emma tending to plants near the side gate earlier that afternoon, which struck her as unusual since the family employed a gardening service. She seemed nervous when I waved to her, Mrs. Tanaka recalled. Usually, she's very polite, but today she barely acknowledged me before hurrying back inside. This observation, seemingly minor at the time, would later support the prosecution's theory that Emma had been checking the side gate security camera positioning, ensuring it wouldn't capture their movements later. The most valuable early evidence came from the home's medicine cabinets and Michael Wilson's private medical bag, where investigators discovered several prescription medications, many with pills missing, compared to the fill dates on the labels. A thorough search of both teenagers' rooms revealed nothing immediately incriminating, though investigators noted the unusual arrangement of Emma's bedroom, her desk positioned to face Liam's window directly across a small courtyard with matching lamps that Emma later claimed they used to signal each other when their parents were asleep. What investigators found more telling was what they didn't find. No diaries, no private notes, no typical teenage personal effects beyond carefully curated displays of academic achievements and musical performances. It felt staged. Detective Palmer later testified, like walking through a model home where the teenager rooms are designed by middle-aged decorators who've forgotten what real teen spaces look like. By the afternoon following the murders, Detective Palmer had assembled his investigative team in a conference room at Honolulu Police Headquarters. The sweeping view of Diamond Head through the windows contrasting with the grim details displayed on evidence boards. "We're treating this as a homicide investigation," he told the assembled detectives and forensic specialists. "The timeline doesn't add up. The security system contradicts their story. And preliminary findings from the ME suggest deliberate poisoning rather than accidental ingestion or food contamination." He assigned detectives to track the siblings' movements in the days leading up to the murders, examine their digital footprints, interview friends and teachers from their school, and establish a complete family history. "Something drove these kids to do this," he said, already convinced of their guilt despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence gathered thus far. "I want to know what it was. And I want evidence that will stand up in court. The foundational clue. Michael Wilson's hand position reaching toward the phone remained closely guarded information mentioned only in sealed reports and discussed exclusively among the core investigative team. This detail was deliberately omitted from all press briefings and interviews with the Wilson siblings, creating what detectives call a holdback that could be used to verify the authenticity of any confession or to catch someone in a lie. Detective Palmer insisted on this approach, telling his team, "If either of those kids mentions that Michael was reaching for the phone, we've got them." The public narrative released to the media described only that the Wilsons had died under suspicious circumstances with toxicology results pending and the investigation ongoing. The teenagers were described as cooperating with police and staying with family friends while detectives worked to determine exactly what had happened in the Ocean View home on that fatal Sunday evening. 3 days after the bodies were discovered, Dr. Alana Nakamura delivered her preliminary findings to the investigative team, confirming what they had suspected. Michael and Isabella Wilson had died from a lethal combination of prescription medications. "We found elevated levels of propranolol, a beta blocker prescribed to Michael for occasional migraines combined with oxycodone and a substantial dose of zolpidem, a sleep medication prescribed to Isabella," Dr. Nakamura explained, pointing to toxicology charts projected on the conference room wall. Any one of these medications in these concentrations could cause serious medical issues. But the combination created a synergistic effect that rapidly suppressed respiratory function while preventing the body's natural compensatory mechanisms from activating. The manner in which the medications had been administered was particularly telling. They had been ground to a fine powder, evidenced by microscopic fragments found in the stomach contents that hadn't fully dissolved, suggesting deliberate processing to disguise them in food rather than accidental ingestion of pills. This evidence transformed the investigation from a suspicious death inquiry to a full homicide case, with Emma and Liam Wilson moving from persons of interest to prime suspects. Detective Palmer assigned his team to build parallel case files on each sibling, tracking their movements, communications, and behaviors in the weeks leading up to the murders. School records revealed both teenagers had maintained their exceptional academic performance, with Emma scoring perfectly on a calculus exam the Friday before the murders and Liam winning a regional science competition that same weekend. That level of academic functioning while planning a double homicide shows remarkable compartmentalization. Forensic psychologist Dr. Maya Rosen would later testify, "Most adolescents experiencing normal life stressors show academic decline. But these two maintained perfect facades while presumably orchestrating the murder of their parents." Friends and classmates interviewed by detectives painted a complex picture of the Wilson siblings, describing them as intelligent but socially isolated, primarily interacting with each other rather than developing separate friendship circles, as most siblings their age would do. They were always together, which seemed weird for a brother and sister with a year between them, said classmate Tyler Nakamura. Like at lunch when everyone else was with their friends, they'd sit alone at a table, just the two of them, whispering and sometimes holding hands under the table. Several students mentioned feeling uncomfortable around the siblings, describing an intensity to their relationship that seemed to exclude everyone else. One former friend of Emma's, Grace Chen, recalled being gradually pushed away after being close with Emma in middle school. Once they started high school, Emma stopped wanting to hang out unless Liam could come, too. "Eventually, I just stopped trying." The digital forensics team made the first major breakthrough, recovering deleted searches from Liam's laptop, despite his attempts to wipe his browsing history. The searches dating back 3 months before the murders included queries on untraceable poisons, medications that cause heart failure, and how to make death look like natural causes. More damning researches specifically about the medications later found in the victim's systems. Propranolol lethal dose. Can zolpidem and oxycodone kill, and do beta blockers mask poison symptoms? These searches were interspersed with more innocent research for school projects and college application information, creating a disturbing juxtaposition of normal teenage concerns alongside methodical murder planning. Equally concerning were downloaded academic papers on toxicology and forensic pathology, suggesting Liam had been researching how investigators might determine cause of death. Emma's devices initially appeared cleaner with no suspicious searches found in her browsing history. But a deeper forensic analysis revealed she had been using a secure browsing app that didn't store history locally. When detectives obtained a warrant for her cloud storage, they discovered a journal kept in a password-protected document titled innocuously as English class notes. The contents revealed Emma's inner thoughts, including entries discussing her relationship with Liam in terms that went far beyond normal sibling affection. "No one understands what we have," she wrote 2 months before the murders. "They would try to separate us if they knew. But I would rather die than be apart from him." Another entry dated just 1 week before the murders showed increasing panic. "Mom was looking at my phone today when I came out of the shower. I think she saw the pictures. She's been watching us differently and I heard her crying in her office. We need to move up our plan before they try to send us away." The most compelling evidence came from the family's home security system, which included interior cameras in the main living areas that the parents had installed primarily to monitor for potential medical emergencies. As Michael occasionally suffered from stress-related cardiac symptoms, the footage from the day of the murders had initially appeared to be missing, with a gap in the recording from 4:00 p.m. until emergency responders arrived, suggesting the siblings had deliberately stopped the recording. However, the system backed up to a cloud server that the teenagers apparently didn't know about. And technicians were able to recover fragments of footage showing Emma adding something to the sauce pot at 5:30 p.m. carefully stirring it and then separating portions into 2 distinct serving bowls before Liam entered. And they exchanged a nod. Though the footage was incomplete due to corrupted file segments, what remained was damning. Emma clearly ladled sauce from one specific bowl onto her parents' plates while serving herself and Liam from the other bowl. Armed with mounting evidence, Detective Palmer decided it was time to formally interview the siblings, hoping to catch them in contradictions or ideally obtain a confession. The interviews were strategically planned to occur simultaneously in separate rooms, preventing any coordination of stories. Emma and Liam were brought to the station under the pretense of providing additional witness statements to help the investigation with their temporary guardian, their mother's colleague from school who had taken them in after the deaths, accompanying them but not permitted in the interview rooms. The siblings were read their Miranda rights, though detectives carefully explained this was standard procedure rather than an indication they were suspects. A technique designed to make the legal warning seem less threatening while ensuring any statements would be admissible in court. Liam's interview was conducted by Detective James Holkey, an experienced interrogator known for his paternal demeanor that often put young suspects at ease. The 16-year-old maintained remarkable composure throughout the first 2 hours, sticking to the established timeline and expressing appropriate grief when discussing his parents. When presented with evidence contradicting their movie alibi, Liam smoothly adjusted the narrative, claiming they had decided at the last minute to go for a drive along the coast instead of watching the film they'd purchased tickets for, explaining why their movements weren't captured on mall security footage. "Emma was really stressed about college application, so we just wanted some quiet time to talk about our futures," he explained, his expression earnest and his voice steady. "We do that sometimes. Just drive and watch the sunset. It helps us think." The explanation was plausible, but conveniently impossible to verify, as the coastal roads they claimed to have driven had no traffic cameras or toll booths that might have captured their journey. Meanwhile, Emma's interview with Detective Palmer took a different approach, with the seasoned investigator alternating between sympathetic understanding and direct challenges to her story. 4 hours into the interview, after methodically exposing inconsistencies in her timeline and confronting her with the recovered security footage of her preparing the sauce, Emma began to show cracks in her composed facade. "I didn't hurt them," she insisted, tears finally appearing after hours of dry-eyed responses. "We loved our parents. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." When Palmer suggested that perhaps it had been Liam's idea, a classic technique to pit suspects against each other, Emma became visibly distressed for the first time. "No, Liam wouldn't. He couldn't. We didn't plan anything together. You're trying to twist things." Her vehement defense of her brother, more passionate than any emotion she'd shown regarding her parents' deaths, confirmed for Palmer the unusual nature of their relationship that witnesses had described. The breaking point came 7 hours into Emma's interview, after Palmer had strategically allowed her to believe that Liam was cooperating with investigators in the other room. Exhausted and increasingly anxious about what her brother might be saying, Emma made a crucial mistake while describing finding her parents' bodies. "I saw Dad first," she said, her voice hollow with fatigue. "He was on the floor, reaching toward the phone like he knew what was happening, and tried to call for help. His fingers were stretched out toward it, just inches away." Palmer, who had intentionally never mentioned this detail to Emma or in any public statement, recognized instantly the significance of her words. "How did you know he was reaching for the phone, Emma?" he asked quietly. "The photos of the crime scene were never released. No one outside the investigation knows exactly how your father's body was positioned." Emma's face froze in the realization of her mistake, and for several long seconds, she sat in stunned silence before asking for a lawyer, effectively ending the interview, but providing investigators with the foundational clue they needed to break the case wide open. With Emma's slip about her father's hand position, a detail only someone present during or immediately after the murders could have known, Detective Palmer now had the cornerstone evidence needed to build a solid case against the siblings. This single detail transformed their circumstantial evidence into something much stronger, creating what prosecutors would later call the evidentiary linchpin that connected the siblings directly to the crime scene at the time of death, contradicting their carefully constructed alibi. The detective immediately documented the exchange in meticulous detail, having the interview transcribed and verified by multiple officers who had been observing through one-way glass. The moment she described Michael's hand position, "I knew we had them," Palmer later testified. "You could see it in her face when she realized what she'd revealed. A micro-expression of pure panic before she shut down completely." With search warrants now easily justified by Emma's revelation, investigators returned to the Wilson home for a more thorough examination, this time looking specifically for evidence of how the poison had been prepared and administered. In the garage, tucked inside a tennis ball canister in Emma's sports equipment bag, they discovered a small marble mortar and pestle with microscopic traces of the same medications found in the victim's systems. The tools had been thoroughly washed, but advanced forensic techniques still detected pharmaceutical residue in the porous stone. In Liam's bedroom, behind a loose section of baseboard near his desk, detectives found a collection of pill bottles matching those missing from the parents' medications, many with labels partially removed in an apparent attempt to prevent identification. Most damning of all, in a false bottom of Emma's jewelry box, investigators discovered a handwritten list of steps for March 12, including notations for prepare special sauce, serve correctly, and establish alibi at mall. Forensic analysis of the kitchen revealed further evidence that had been missed in the initial search, including traces of crushed medications in the garbage disposal that hadn't completely washed away despite attempts to clean it. The specific grinder attachment for the family's high-end blender showed microscopic fragments of pills when swabbed, suggesting it had been used to pulverize the medications into a fine powder that could be disguised in food. Most importantly, when luminol was sprayed on the kitchen counter surfaces, it revealed patterns consistent with someone carefully measuring powder into separate portions with distinct outlines visible under UV light, where piles of the crushed medications had briefly rested before being added to the sauce. They tried to clean up, forensic technician Naomi Yamamoto testified, but they didn't understand that microscopic traces remain even after visible evidence is gone. Digital evidence continued to mount as investigators dug deeper into the siblings' electronic communications. While they hadn't used their phones to explicitly discuss murder plans, seemingly aware that such messages could be recovered, they had developed a coded language that once deciphered clearly referenced their plot. Messages between them contained references to the project deadline and making sure we have all the ingredients interspersed with declarations of love that went far beyond normal sibling affection. One particularly incriminating exchange occurred 3 days before the murders with Liam texting, "Are you sure this is our only option? We could still try to run." Emma's response was chilling in its determination. "They'll never let us be together if we don't do this. It's the only way we'll be free." These messages, when presented alongside Emma's recovered journal entries, painted a clear picture of the siblings' motive. They feared their parents had discovered their incestuous relationship and would separate them. The autopsy results provided the final pieces needed to complete the timeline of events on the night of the murders. Dr. Alana Nakamura's detailed report indicated that Michael and Isabella Wilson had died approximately 2 hours before the 911 call was placed. Aligning perfectly with the security footage showing Emma preparing 2 separate sauce portions around 5:30 p.m., the report detailed how the combination of medications would have affected the victims. Beginning with dizziness and confusion, progressing to severe respiratory depression, and culminating in cardiac arrest. Based on the autopsy findings, Isabella Wilson likely lost consciousness within 15 minutes of ingesting the contaminated food, while Michael Wilson, who was larger and had some tolerance to beta blockers due to his prescription, remained conscious longer, which explains his attempt to reach the phone. Dr. Nakamura explained the difference in their physical responses gave us crucial information about the timeline of events that evening, with search warrants for all electronic devices and accounts associated with the siblings. Investigators discovered perhaps the most disturbing evidence on a password-protected cloud storage account linked to Liam's email. The account contained hundreds of photos of Emma in various stages of undress, along with intimate videos of the siblings together that confirmed the sexual nature of their relationship. Metadata on the files showed the relationship had been physical for at least a year before the murders, with the earliest dated images from when Emma was 16 and Liam 15. Among these files was a folder labeled Our Life containing digitally altered photos showing the siblings in various locations around the world: Paris, Tokyo, New York, with accompanying journal entries describing the life they planned to create together once they were free from interference. These materials not only established motive, but revealed the extent of planning that had gone into their post-murder future, with detailed notes on how they would access their parents' accounts and live off the inheritance once they turned 18. The investigation also revealed how the siblings had gained the knowledge to carry out their plan. Liam, as part of an advanced placement chemistry course, had recently completed a toxicology unit that included studying drug interactions and the chemical properties of various medications. His teacher, Dr. Raymond Chen, confirmed that Liam had shown particular interest in a lecture on fatal drug combinations, asking several detailed questions about how such deaths might appear to medical examiners. Emma, meanwhile, had used her position as assistant to the school librarian to access medical journals and forensic publications normally restricted to faculty, checking out materials on forensic pathology and criminal investigations under the guise of research for a creative writing project. The school's records showed she had specifically requested materials on how poisons are detected in autopsies and how crime scenes are processed for evidence. Friends and classmates, initially reluctant to speak ill of the grieving siblings, began to share concerning observations as the investigation progressed. Several mentioned instances where the siblings' behavior had seemed inappropriate: sitting too close together at school events, Emma wearing Liam's clothes, and one particularly troubling incident at a school dance where they had been seen slow dancing together in a manner that made observers uncomfortable. Kay Hernandez, who had briefly dated Liam the previous year, described how Emma had become hostile toward her, sending threatening messages and ultimately causing Liam to end the relationship after just 3 weeks. "He told me his sister needed him more than I did," Kay recalled. "He said they had a special bond that no one else could understand and that dating anyone else wasn't fair to Emma." Teachers and school administrators provided additional context that helped investigators understand how the siblings had maintained their facade of normalcy while concealing their inappropriate relationship and murderous plans. Both Emma and Liam were described as exceptional students who had mastered the art of presenting exactly what adults wanted to see: polite, engaged, academically focused teenagers who never caused problems. School counselor David Arcana noted that both had been particularly skilled at deflecting personal questions, always steering conversations back to academic achievements or future plans. In hindsight, they were remarkably adept at creating a perfect exterior that prevented anyone from looking deeper. He said they knew exactly how to appear just normal enough that no one would think to question what was happening beneath the surface. Perhaps most revealing were interviews with Isabella's colleagues who recalled conversations where she had expressed increasing concern about her children's relationship in the months leading up to her death. Fellow counselor Teresa Kawamoto described a lunch meeting 2 weeks before the murders where Isabella had seemed distracted and worried. She mentioned that she and Michael were dealing with a serious family issue that might require the kids to attend separate boarding schools the following year. Teresa recalled, She didn't give specifics, but she used language we counselors typically use when discussing inappropriate sexual behavior. Saying they needed intensive intervention and environmental separation. I offered to help, but she said it was too personal and they needed to handle it as parents first before bringing in outside support. This conversation provided crucial context for the parents' actions leading up to their deaths, supporting the theory that they had discovered the siblings' relationship and were planning to intervene. The very scenario that Emma's journal indicated they feared. 9 days after the discovery of Michael and Isabella Wilson's bodies, with evidence mounting and prosecutors confident in their case, Detective Palmer obtained arrest warrants for both Emma and Liam Wilson on charges of first-degree murder. The early morning arrest was deliberately planned to catch the siblings off guard, with officers arriving at the home of their temporary guardian, Dr. Melissa Chen, just after 6 a.m. while they were still asleep. The arrest team, led by Palmer himself, approached the upscale Manoa Valley home where the siblings had been staying. The misty rain typical of the neighborhood, creating an appropriately somber atmosphere for what was about to unfold. Officers surrounded the property before Detective Palmer knocked firmly on the front door. His expression grim as Dr. Chen answered in her bathrobe, immediately understanding the significance of the police presence on her doorstep. "They're upstairs," she said quietly. "They share the guest room. They insisted on staying together despite my offering separate rooms." This final detail that the siblings had maintained their unusual closeness, even while staying in someone else's home, added yet another piece to the mounting evidence of their inappropriate relationship. Officers found Emma and Liam in the same bed, a discovery that would later be noted in the arrest report and used by prosecutors to establish the nature of their relationship. As the teenagers were awakened and informed they were under arrest for the murders of Michael and Isabella Wilson, their reactions diverged significantly for the first time since the investigation began. Liam became immediately alert and controlled, asking calmly about the charges and requesting an attorney with the composure of someone much older than his 16 years. Emma, by contrast, collapsed into hysterics, alternating between sobbing uncontrollably and calling out for Liam as officers separated them to be transported to the juvenile detention facility. Her carefully maintained composure finally shattering under the reality of their situation. The siblings were processed separately at the Honolulu Juvenile Detention Center, although prosecutors had already filed motions to have them tried as adults given the severity and premeditated nature of the crimes. During processing, Emma continued to display extreme distress when separated from her brother, behavior that juvenile intake counselor Kia Matsumoto described as more consistent with a romantic partner being separated from a lover than a sister concerned about her brother. Liam, meanwhile, maintained his remarkable self-control, answering intake questions precisely and showing little emotion beyond occasionally asking if Emma was all right, when informed they would be housed in separate wings of the facility, with no contact permitted between them. Liam's composure finally cracked slightly, with detention officers noting his first display of genuine distress as he argued that Emma needed him and would fall apart without him. Following their arrests, both siblings were appointed attorneys through the public defender's office, with Emma represented by veteran defense attorney Stephanie Noda and Liam by criminal defense specialist Marcus Wong. Despite legal counsel advising both teenagers to remain silent, Liam requested a meeting with Detective Palmer the day after their arrest against his attorney's explicit advice. He seemed to think he could talk his way out of the situation. Wong later told reporters, "Despite my strongest objections, he insisted on speaking with investigators, convinced he was smarter than everyone involved in the case." This overconfidence, characteristic of certain personality disorders, would prove to be a critical mistake in the siblings' defense strategy, opening the door to damaging admissions that might otherwise have been avoided. The interrogation room at Honolulu Police Headquarters, where Liam was interviewed, was deliberately sparse. A metal table bolted to the floor, 4 matching chairs, and a one-way observation window through which multiple detectives and prosecutors observed the exchange. Detective Palmer entered, carrying only a thin file folder, a strategic choice meant to suggest to Liam that the case against them was still developing, potentially encouraging him to offer explanations that might seem helpful to his situation, but would ultimately provide more evidence for the prosecution. "I appreciate you wanting to talk to me, Liam," Palmer began, his tone professional, but not unfriendly. Your attorney has informed you of your rights, correct? Liam nodded, displaying the confident smile that many would later describe as chilling in its inappropriateness to the circumstances. I think there have been some misunderstandings that I can clear up, he responded, leaning forward as if preparing to take control of the conversation. Over the next 3 hours, Liam attempted to construct an elaborate alternative explanation for the evidence against them, suggesting that perhaps their parents had accidentally taken too much medication with their dinner, or that a recently fired housekeeper might have tampered with their food in revenge. With each theory he proposed, Detective Palmer calmly presented contradicting evidence: the mortar and a pestle with pill residue found in Emma's tennis bag, the handwritten checklist of steps for the day of the murder, the text messages discussing the project deadline. Liam's responses became increasingly strained as he attempted to explain away each piece of evidence, his initial confidence giving way to visible frustration as he realized the extent of what investigators had discovered. You don't understand the pressure we were under, he finally said, shifting his approach from denial to justification. Our parents were trying to control every aspect of our lives. They were going to send us to different boarding schools, separate us completely. When Palmer directly asked about the nature of his relationship with Emma, Liam's demeanor changed dramatically, his voice taking on a passionate intensity that hadn't been present before. Emma is everything to me, he said, his eyes never leaving Palmer's face. We understand each other in ways no one else ever could. What we have isn't wrong just because society says it is. When Palmer mentioned the intimate photos and videos found in his cloud storage, Liam didn't deny their existence or meaning. Love is love, he insisted, using language typically associated with legitimate social justice movements in a disturbing appropriation that prosecutors would later highlight as evidence of his distorted moral reasoning. We didn't choose to feel this way about each other, but we weren't going to let anyone take it from us either. This partial admission of motive while stopping short of confessing to the murders themselves provided investigators with crucial confirmation of their theory of the case. While Liam was being interviewed, Emma remained in the juvenile detention center, refusing to speak with investigators, but reportedly asking staff repeatedly when she would be able to see her brother. Detention officer Malia Kanakoya noted in her report that Emma spent most of her time either pacing her cell or writing in a notebook provided by her attorney, occasionally tearing out pages and flushing them down the toilet when she thought no one was watching. When informed that Liam was speaking with detectives, Emma became highly agitated, demanding to know what he was saying and insisting she needed to talk to him immediately. They're turning him against me, she told Officer Kakoa, her voice frantic. They don't understand. We promised we'd never let anyone come between us. 3 days after their arrests, the siblings were brought to court for their initial appearance, their first time seeing each other since being taken into custody. Court officers noted that Emma visibly relaxed upon seeing Liam enter the courtroom, while he gave her a subtle nod that appeared to be reassuring. Judge Gloria Nakamura granted the prosecution's motion to try both siblings as adults given the premeditated nature of the crimes and the extensive evidence of planning, moving the case from family court to the adult criminal system where they would face the possibility of much harsher sentences, including potentially the death penalty. As the siblings were led away to separate holding cells, this cryptic statement, captured by courtroom microphones and reported widely in media coverage, would later be interpreted by prosecutors as evidence of a suicide pact between the siblings, leading to increased security measures for both defendants during the penalty phase of the trial. Outside the courthouse, reaction to the verdict split largely along generational lines, with older community members expressing satisfaction with the guilty verdicts while younger protesters questioned whether teenagers should face the death penalty regardless of their crimes. Isabella Wilson's colleagues from Pinoho School gathered on the courthouse steps holding candles in a silent vigil for their lost friend, while Michael's medical partners released a statement expressing profound relief that justice has been served for two people who dedicated their lives to helping others. In contrast, a group of university students and juvenile justice advocates staged a demonstration against capital punishment for minors carrying signs reading, "Rehabilitation, not retribution," and "No child deserves death." This division reflected the complex emotions stirred by the case. Horror at the crime committed, yet discomfort with the prospect of executing teenagers, even for such calculated murders. Media coverage of the verdict was immediate and extensive, with national networks interrupting regular programming to announce the outcome and legal analysts weighing in on the likelihood of death sentences being imposed. Hawaii has the death penalty, but hasn't executed anyone since 1944, noted CNN legal correspondent Elena Kwan, and never for defendants as young as the Wilson siblings. However, the particularly calculated nature of these murders and the equal culpability found by the jury may make this case an exception. Local coverage focused more on the community impact, with the Honolulu Star-Advertiser running the headline "Justice for Michael and Isabella" alongside a family photo taken during happier times with the teenage siblings' faces respectfully blurred, a practice the paper had maintained throughout its coverage of the case. The psychological impact of the verdict on the siblings became apparent in the days that followed, with reports from detention staff noting significant changes in both Emma and Liam's behaviors. Emma, who had maintained emotional volatility throughout the trial, now fell into a state of near catatonia, refusing food and responding only minimally to questions from her attorneys and medical staff. Court-appointed psychologist Dr. David Suzuki recommended immediate suicide watch protocols after observing what he described as dangerous disengagement consistent with pre-suicidal behavior. Liam, by contrast, became increasingly agitated, demanding to see his sister and insisting to guards that they had a plan they needed to execute together. Statements that reinforced concerns about a potential suicide pact and led to increased security measures for both siblings. As the penalty phase approached, both defense teams worked frantically to assemble mitigating evidence that might spare their clients from death sentences. Stephanie Noda focused on brain development research showing the biological immaturity of the adolescent brain, particularly in areas responsible for impulse control and consequence evaluation. She also arranged for testimony from mental health experts who would argue that Emma suffered from attachment disorders stemming from early childhood experiences that made her uniquely vulnerable to the inappropriate relationship with her brother. Marcus Wong pursued a different strategy for Liam, focusing on his exceptional intelligence and academic potential, arguing that his skills could be utilized productively even within a prison environment, making a life sentence more appropriate than execution. Prosecutor Violet Cooper prepared for the penalty phase with the same methodical thoroughness she had demonstrated throughout the trial, assembling victim impact statements from friends, colleagues, and patients whose lives had been touched by Michael and Isabella Wilson. She also scheduled testimony from forensic psychiatrists who would argue that the siblings' calculated planning, lack of remorse, and continued devotion to each other rather than recognition of their victims' humanity suggested limited potential for meaningful rehabilitation. The prosecutor's strategy aimed to demonstrate that the premeditated nature of the crimes, the suffering of the victims, and the siblings' failure to show genuine remorse justified the ultimate punishment regardless of their age at the time of the murders. As Hawaii grappled with its first high-profile capital case involving juvenile defendants in decades, the Wilson murders sparked renewed debate about juvenile justice, mental health intervention, and the death penalty. Legal scholars published opinions arguing both sides of whether the death penalty could be justified for defendants under 18, with constitutional experts noting that while the Supreme Court had limited juvenile executions, it had not eliminated them entirely for particularly heinous crimes committed by older juveniles. Mental health professionals called for better systems to identify and address inappropriate relationships within families, suggesting that earlier intervention might have prevented the tragedy. Throughout these broader discussions, the focus repeatedly returned to the central disturbing question that had captivated public attention from the beginning. How could two teenagers from a loving, privileged home develop such a distorted bond that they would murder their own parents rather than face separation? 1 year after the verdict, on a warm April morning, with plumeria blossoms scenting the air, a small group gathered at Oahu Cemetery to mark the anniversary of Michael and Isabella Wilson's deaths. Catherine Brooks, Isabella's sister, laid orchid leis on the shared headstone that featured the couple's wedding portrait and the inscription, "Beloved healers of bodies, minds, and hearts." Friends and colleagues stood in a loose circle, sharing memories of the couple and the countless lives they had touched through their work. Michael's patients who had received second chances at life through his skilled hands. Isabella's students who had found direction and purpose through her guidance. No one mentioned the two young people whose actions had brought them all to this place of mourning, their names having become almost taboo within the tight-knit communities that had loved the Wilsons. The ceremony concluded with the singing of Aloha Oi, the traditional Hawaiian farewell song, its gentle melody carrying on the trade winds that swept across the cemetery's rolling green hills with views of both mountains and ocean. The natural beauty of the islands providing a stark contrast to the darkness of the tragedy being commemorated. The penalty phase of the Wilson siblings' trial had concluded 8 months earlier with a decision that surprised many legal observers. The jury recommended life imprisonment without possibility of parole for both Emma and Liam, sparing them from death row despite convicting them of premeditated murder. The decision came after 2 weeks of emotional testimony that focused less on the crimes themselves and more on questions of adolescent brain development, rehabilitation potential, and the appropriate punishment for defendants who were legally minors at the time of their offenses. In explaining their recommendation, jury foreperson Alicia Nakamura told reporters, "We were unanimous in our belief that the Wilsons were murdered in a calculated, cruel manner by their children. But we could not reach consensus that executing teenagers, regardless of their crimes, was the right response from a civilized society." This nuanced position, holding the siblings fully accountable while rejecting the death penalty, reflected the complex moral questions the case had raised for many in Hawaii and beyond. Judge Samuel Ikeda accepted the jury's recommendation, sentencing both siblings to consecutive life terms without possibility of parole for each murder. In his sentencing statement, Ikeda addressed the defendants directly for the first time, his normally measured judicial demeanor giving way to unmistakable emotion. While the law recognizes your chronological age at the time of these crimes, it cannot ignore the level of calculation, the breach of fundamental trust, and the utter lack of empathy your actions demonstrated. He told the siblings who stood before him in matching prison attire, "You took the lives of two extraordinary people who had given you everything, including the privilege of growing up in a paradise many can only dream of. And you did so for entirely selfish reasons." Ikeda concluded by addressing the broader implications of the case, noting that while the siblings would have the remainder of their lives to reflect on their actions, Michael and Isabella Wilson were denied the opportunity to see the future they had worked so hard to create, to continue their service to this community, or to experience the joy of growing old together in the home they had made on these islands they loved. Following sentencing, Emma and Liam were separated permanently, with Emma transferred to the Women's Community Correctional Center in Kua, while Liam was sent to Halawa Correctional Facility, the maximum security men's prison on the opposite side of Oahu. This physical separation, the very thing they had killed to avoid, became their permanent reality, with court orders prohibiting any communication between them. No letters, phone calls, or messages through third parties. Prison officials reported that this forced separation affected the siblings differently, with Emma falling into severe depression that required psychiatric intervention and medication, while Liam appeared to adapt quickly to prison life, focusing on continuing his education through correspondence courses and establishing a position of intellectual respect among both inmates and staff. This divergence in their ability to cope with separation became the subject of several psychological studies, with researchers suggesting it reflected fundamental differences in their psychological makeup that had been obscured by their intense codependency before incarceration. The Wilson case sparked significant legislative changes in Hawaii, beginning with the Michael and Isabella Wilson Act passed 18 months after the verdict. The law enhanced penalties for familial homicides, expanded mandatory reporting requirements for school counselors who observed signs of inappropriate relationships between siblings, and established a specialized family intervention unit within the Department of Human Services, specifically trained to address cases of genetic sexual attraction and unhealthy familial bonds before they escalated to violence. State Senator Lisa Taniguchi, who sponsored the legislation, described it as an attempt to ensure that the next Isabella Wilson, who notices concerning signs within a family, has immediate access to specialized resources rather than having to navigate this dangerous situation alone. The law also included funding for education programs in schools to help students recognize appropriate versus inappropriate family relationships with age-appropriate curriculum designed to encourage reporting of concerning situations. Beyond legislative changes, the case transformed professional practices across multiple fields in Hawaii. The medical community, honoring Michael Wilson's legacy, established more rigorous protocols for securing and disposing of prescription medications with the state medical board, requiring regular training on recognizing signs of medication diversion and misuse. School counseling departments throughout Hawaii revised their assessment protocols to include specific screening for unhealthy sibling relationships with Puno School where Isabella had worked, developing a nationally recognized training program for educators on identifying concerning family dynamics. The legal system too was changed by the case, with prosecutors and defenders alike developing specialized approaches to cases involving juvenile defendants accused of serious crimes. Recognizing the need to balance accountability with the realities of adolescent development and rehabilitation potential. The public fascination with the Wilson case continued long after the verdict, spawning books, documentaries, and even a controversial Hollywood film that many in Hawaii criticized for sensationalizing the tragedy and disrespecting the victim's memory. More thoughtful examinations came from academic quarters, with the case becoming a standard study in forensic psychology programs nationwide. Often paired with discussions of adolescent brain development, family systems theory, and the psychology of incestuous relationships. Dr. Maya Rosen, who had testified as an expert witness during the trial, published a comprehensive analysis of the case titled Boundaries Destroyed: The Psychology of the Wilson Siblings, which became required reading in many criminal psychology courses and established her as a leading authority on familicide motivated by inappropriate familial relationships. The book carefully balanced clinical analysis with respect for the victims, dedicating all proceeds to the scholarship funds established in Michael and Isabella Wilson's names. Catherine Brooks, determined that her sister and brother-in-law be remembered for their lives rather than only for the manner of their deaths, established the Wilson Foundation for Youth Mental Health using funds from the sale of the family home and contributions from friends and colleagues. The foundation provided scholarships for students pursuing careers in adolescent psychology and counseling, funded research into early intervention strategies for troubled teens, and supported direct services for families in crisis. Isabella would want something positive to come from this unimaginable tragedy, Brooks explained at the foundation's launch event held at Pinoho School 2 years after the murders. She dedicated her life to helping young people navigate the complexities of adolescence. And this foundation will continue that mission, perhaps preventing other families from experiencing similar tragedies. The foundation quickly became one of Hawaii's most respected nonprofit organizations. Its annual benefit concert at the Wiki Show, drawing support from local celebrities and community leaders committed to improving mental health services for youth. For the law enforcement professionals who had worked the case, the Wilson murders left lasting impacts on their approaches to investigation and their understanding of family violence. Detective Satoshi Palmer, who had initially broken the case through Emma's slip about her father's hand position, became a sought-after instructor at police MIs throughout the Pacific, teaching specialized courses on interviewing juvenile suspects and recognizing deception in family crime cases. The Wilson case taught us that the most dangerous threats sometimes hide in plain sight. Palmer explained in an interview 5 years after the trial. These weren't teenagers with obvious risk factors. No prior violence, no drug use, excellent students from a loving home. Yet, they developed a relationship so distorted and secretive that it ultimately led to murder when threatened. Palmer's training programs emphasize the importance of looking beyond superficial presentations to identify concerning patterns of behavior, particularly in cases where family dynamics appeared unusually inshed or isolated from outside influences. The Wilson siblings themselves followed dramatically different paths in the years following their incarceration. Emma, after initially struggling with severe depression and making 2 suicide attempts in her first year of imprisonment, eventually began participating in intensive therapy programs available at the women's facility. Prison records indicated slow but steady progress in her psychological treatment, with gradual development of insight into the dysfunctional nature of her relationship with Liam and the enormity of what they had done. 5 years into her sentence, she began speaking to supervised groups of troubled teenage girls about unhealthy relationships and the consequences of her choices. Her experiences serving as a powerful cautionary tale that resonated with young women at risk of similar patterns. While prison psychologists noted that Emma would likely never fully recover from the psychological damage of the incestuous relationship and the guilt of patricide, they documented meaningful progress toward developing a separate identity and recognizing the manipulation inherent in her bond with her brother. Liam's prison adjustment followed a different trajectory, with correctional staff noting his remarkable ability to compartmentalize his crimes while focusing on intellectual pursuits and developing influence within the prison social structure. He completed a bachelor's degree in mathematics through correspondence courses within 3 years of incarceration, followed by graduate-level studies that resulted in published papers in academic journals. Publications that generated significant controversy in the scientific community regarding the ethics of accepting scholarly contributions from convicted murderers. Unlike his sister, Liam showed little interest in therapeutic programs addressing the nature of his crimes or his relationship with Emma. Instead, focusing his considerable intellectual capabilities on abstract problems that allowed him to maintain emotional distance from his actions. Prison psychologists characterized him as showing signs of antisocial personality disorder, noting his apparent lack of genuine remorse and his tendency to view his incarceration as an inconvenient interruption of his potential rather than as justified punishment for murder. 10 years after the murders, both siblings remained firmly embedded in the public consciousness of Hawaii, their names still instantly recognizable to virtually everyone on the islands despite rarely being spoken aloud in polite company. What had once been the Wilson family home in Kahala had been sold, demolished, and rebuilt by new owners unable to overcome the property's dark history despite its prime location and ocean views. Puno School had established the Isabella Wilson Counseling Center, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to student mental health services that served as a living memorial to their former colleague. Queens Medical Center had created the Michael Wilson Fellowship in Neurosurgery, bringing promising young surgeons to Hawaii to continue the innovative work he had pioneered before his death. These positive legacies existed alongside the inescapable shadow of the case, with the Wilson murders becoming shorthand in local vernacular for any shocking betrayal or hidden family dysfunction that erupted into public view. Perhaps the most profound and lasting impact of the Wilson case emerged in how it transformed Hawaii's understanding of the complexities of family psychology and the potential darkness that can develop even in seemingly ideal homes. The islands, long celebrated for their strong family-centered culture, captured in the concept of Ohana family, were forced to confront the reality that even within the most privileged and respected families, dangerous dynamics could develop undetected behind closed doors. This recognition led to a community-wide commitment to more open discussions about family mental health with churches, schools, and community centers throughout Hawaii, developing programs that encouraged healthy family relationships while providing safe spaces for young people to discuss concerns that might previously have remained hidden out of shame or fear. If there's any positive legacy from this tragedy, reflected former prosecutor Violet Cooper on the 10th anniversary of the case, it's that our community no longer assumes that beautiful homes and successful careers guarantee healthy family dynamics. We've learned to look deeper, to ask difficult questions, and to intervene earlier when concerning patterns emerge. The Wilson case ultimately became more than the story of a shocking murder or a sensational trial. It evolved into a complex cautionary tale about the devastating consequences that can result when boundaries are violated. Warning signs are missed and disturbed psychological bonds are allowed to develop in isolation. For the people of Hawaii, who pride themselves on their close-knit communities and protective attitude toward Kiki children, the case represented both a profound failure and a powerful call to action. 10 years after a brother and sister poisoned their parents to prevent their incestuous relationship from being discovered, the islands had transformed their grief and shock into concrete improvements in how they protected vulnerable young people and supported families in crisis. This transformation from tragedy to protection, from horror to prevention, became the unexpected legacy of Michael and Isabella Wilson. whose lives of service to others continued to inspire positive change even long after their deaths at the hands of the children they had loved unconditionally. Ali